Welcome to another episode of the Upper Bowl Perspective, a Utah Jazz podcast showing that the fans sitting in the nosebleeds know just as much as those sitting courtside. And Kyler and Landon, it was so good to be back in the Delta Center for the first time since the brand change. It's been a fun week in Salt Lake City with us hosting Summer League, and we actually went to the Summer League games on Monday. And in this episode, we're super excited to talk about what we saw from some of our players, what we saw from the team, and just general thoughts now as we start to see some of our younger, less developed talent start playing in the Utah Jazz jersey. Today, we're specifically going to be talking about two players in a little bit more depth that we see as being big parts of the Jazz's roster and is hopefully part of the rotation going forward. And the first one is one of our second round picks, Keyonte George. Now, when we were watching that game on Monday, it really seemed to be a tale of two halves. I remember in the first half, we were watching Keyonte George trying to guard even Summer League players, and I believe by the half he had 4 fouls and just wasn't having much of an offensive game. But then he ended up finishing really, really strong in the third and fourth quarters, the fourth quarter specifically, ending up with 18 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, 3 steals, and shooting almost 45% from the field. Kyler, Landon, seeing as this was the first time we actually got to see Keyonte George play against quote-unquote NBA-level talent, I just want to know, how did it make you feel about taking him with that 16th overall pick now that we've actually got to see him a little bit more in action?
For me, I honestly wasn't too surprised with the performance. I thought from what I saw from him in the pre-draft process, a lot of his strengths showed up, and so did his weaknesses. I mean, my number one takeaway is that the dude effortlessly created space, which we always knew he could do. He has the handle and the creativity to find a shot when he wants to find a shot. And just kind of passing wise, he's definitely somebody that likes to go for the flashy pass. And we saw it work out for him. We also saw it not quite so much work out for him. But offensively, going to be a fun player for the Jazz next year for sure. He's going to have games and moments that you're really excited about, and probably going to have some that you're not so much. But yeah, I think it was probably a little bit stocked up, just because you like to see the things that you thought he was good at in college translate at least to the summer league, not full NBA level. But I wouldn't say I was too shocked by his performance.
Yeah, I would say after watching him, I'm cautiously optimistic about his role in his future in the NBA. The reason being, I think to Kyler's point, he was exactly what he was in college in these games. Showed flashes of good scoring, showed flashes of having high efficiency type stuff. I know in his last game against the Grizzlies, he went 10 for 10 from the foul line, which if that can translate to the NBA, that's what stars do. So that was encouraging to see. It looked like he made a very conscious effort to be a playmaker, especially in that first game that we saw. And I think that resulted in him kind of forcing some passes, which is why he had a 1-to-1 assist to turnover ratio in that first game. But I think you should be optimistic about his willingness to be that lead ball handler and that lead kind of playmaker. Hopefully with some coaching, again, he'll be able to recognize those reads and make those passes better. I was surprised by his defense, if I'm being honest with you. I know we talked about how he got 4 fouls fast in that first game. I think he had 4 before the end of the first half. Thing about that is by the end of that first half, he was being targeted on the defensive end of the floor. He was being picked out in isolation plays to see if they could get him to pick up that 5th foul. And when his back was against the wall, he played really solid defense. He stayed in front of his man. He didn't foul and was able to stay on the floor. So I think he showed some good signs of being a good on-ball defender. And other types of schemes, I think there are concerns there just because of his size. If teams decide to switch and try to, put him on some bigger players. But as a guard defender, I think he showed some flashes of good defense. And I think hopefully that will translate as soon as he goes into the, the real pros in the regular season.
We've talked about it a lot on this podcast, just in terms of how we want to see Keyonte George develop over his time to become the player he needs to be to get consistent rotation minutes in the NBA. So for me specifically, I was looking for defense and passing. And in the 3 games that he played over this week, he ended up with 13 assists, which showed that at least he's a very willing passer. He had a couple passes specifically that were really impressive. There was one right to the end of the game against OKC where in transition, he was able to do a bounce pass directly to, I think it was Micah Potter, and he was able to really thread the needle, which looked really impressive, just showing that maybe we didn't get to see his full passing ability while he was in college, and maybe that's an area that the Jazz can help unlock. On the defensive end, I was pleasantly surprised how good his on-ball defense was in the second half of that OKC game, and then later when they were playing against the Sixers and the Grizzlies. There's certainly some work that needs to be done on that end. I mean, he's not playing against elite talent in Summer League, but I was pleasantly surprised how he was able to shift his feet, his footwork, his lateral quickness, which there were a few plays where he was guarding Jalen Williams, where he was actually able to stay in front of him pretty well. And Jalen Williams is a legitimate NBA player. So I think there were certainly enough flashes of his game. And granted, this is still very early days yet, but it seemed like everything that he needs to work on to become a good NBA player from college, it seems like he was actively working on those in Summer League, which is obviously a great sign for Jazz fans who want to see him become a more well-rounded player than he showed when he was at college. Was there anything that you two found surprising about his game over the last week?
Honestly, no. Like I said, I think the defense and the passing you guys are talking about, he showed that at Baylor last year. Honestly, like, I don't know. Maybe I just saw him a little bit differently than you guys, but I knew he was going to be at least a solid defender. He wasn't going to be like this terrible defender, and he did like these, really impressive passes. He had those at Baylor too. The fact that he limited his turnovers was probably, I would say, the biggest surprise, because that was his problem at Baylor, because he's always been a guy who's trying to find like the fancy pass that gets the crowd's reaction, and the reality is a lot of the times that ends up being a turnover as well. Just because those are high difficulty passes, and the bounce pass late in that game on the transition to Simonic, like you were talking about, was definitely an example of the high end of those. But I just think he learned quickly. I remember his first kind of attempt at a really highlight pass was in transition to Ochai Agbaji, and he tried to basically thread it through the defense, and Ochai's like, bro, send that up. I want the hoop. And by the end, when next time he had an opportunity with Ochai Agbaji, he was throwing the hoop. And so I think he's willing to learn on the fly, and I think he did a good job of it. If I would say one thing that was, I don't know if it was necessarily surprising, but with him changing body types so much between what he played at college last year to the draft, right, to the summer league, he slimmed down a lot, and I wanted to see if that created a lot more explosion at the rim. And he had some shots that were blocked pretty bad, and I still think his explosiveness to get high at the point of attack at the rim is not going to be something that is going to work out very well for him. He's not a particularly explosive vertical athlete. And so for an NBA player, obviously, for a regular person, he is. But I would say that would be something that I'm going to be keeping my eye on towards coming to the regular season, is can he maybe work on a different package of finishing moves? It got him to the line a few times. Like Landon said, he had 10 free throw attempts by the last game, but he also got absolutely destroyed by Chet Holmgren and others sometimes too. So I like the experimentation at Summer League. Go for it. See if you can challenge these guys. But I just don't know if that's going to be part of his game come NBA regular season.
Yeah. For me, I think what surprised me was his ability to impact the game outside of scoring. I think especially if you look at that last game against the Grizzlies, his shooting splits were horrible in that game. Let's see if I can pull them up real quick.
Yeah, I think he was 2 for 11.
Yeah, 1 for 8 from three. He still finished the game with a plus 23, which to me speaks to his ability to, you know, make good plays, his ability to get to the free throw line, his ability to play good defense. So obviously he came in as a scorer. Hopefully that efficiency goes up again. He wasn't very efficient in college, but if he's not, if he's having off shooting nights, that shows to me that he has the potential to do other things to help the Jazz win games going forward. So for me, that's kind of what I was pleasantly surprised about, is that I don't think he's quite as one dimensional as we may have thought coming out of college.
Yeah, I mean, I know my biggest concerns with Keyonte when the Jazz drafted him was just, is he going to be able to be a complete player? He didn't have the size or the athleticism or the shooting chops that made me think that he has an elite NBA ready skill that's going to put him like in a situation where he's going to be good right away. And so for me, I saw the most likely path for him getting consistent minutes and for him being really successful his rookie year was going to be focusing on a lot of those other little things that you were talking about, Landon. Like, can he get his assist to turnover ratio in a better spot than it was in college? Can he play consistent defense? Can he continue to pass with, good efficiency? Will he look for that pass? And I think sometimes we forget that even as highly as touted as some of these prospects are, or how excited we are when they come into the league, nobody's a finished product when they come into the league. Even Victor Wembanyama, who's the most hyped up prospect we've had in 20 years, you saw that first summer league game that he had in Vegas, and it looked rough. I mean, sure, there were some highlight plays, but I think even he admitted it in the press conference afterwards that he didn't really know what he was doing out there, and he still needs to continue to grow and to expand his game. And that's what I think is exciting about Summer League, is that at least what I've seen with Keyonte George so far is that he's willing to modify his game, change how he plays a little bit, and really adapt to the NBA style of basketball opposed to the college style of basketball where he was like the guy, which I think is extremely promising, because if you have a guy who's willing to accept his role and continue to grow in that role, then you'll see someone who's going to continue to improve rather than saying, no, this is who I am, this type of player I am, my way or the highway. You never want to have those guys in your team. And I've been impressed with Keyonte's ability and decision to completely buy into being a winning player as much as he can at this point of his career, which makes me super excited about what he can become with the Jazz over the next few seasons. So he had his good game against OKC, his first game. We already talked about the Grizzlies where he did not have a good shooting performance. I think the one that maybe excited me the most was actually the game against Philly. He was much more efficient in that game. He shot over 50% from the field, and he went 3 for 5 from the 3-point line. And he ended with a very respectable line of 14 points, 3 rebounds, and 4 assists, which obviously with Keyonte George, his efficiency is something that would maybe be a question mark coming into the season. And he at least showed flashes of being able to be a little more consistent against the 76ers. So my question for you is, seeing these 3 games we've seen so far, which obviously is a small sample size, what kind of shooting splits do you think we can expect from Keyonte George in his first year? Because obviously we don't expect him to be uber efficient, but at least from your perspective, do you think he's going to be more efficient than he was in college on lower volume? Do you think he's going to be less efficient as he adjusts to the NBA? If you had to bet on it, what do you think he's going to look like as a shooter going into this year?
Not great, Kyler. I really, and JR, I really don't think so. I think a lot of it depends again on his ability to pass. Like if he can get out of some tough situations by, making plays for other guys, that'll be a little different. And obviously, playing in the NBA, I think I would almost expect those assist numbers to go up just because he's passing to real NBA players, not summer league players. But again, if he can't quite get that playmaking figured out and he's going to be, taking a lot of shots, I don't think he showed anything that, at least at this point, that shows that he can be much more efficient than what he was here. I expect him to be, low 40s, high 30s at best. Again, that's just for his rookie year. I expect him to grow and develop out of that. I think as he gets more reps and more times, he's going to get more efficient and could probably, get up to what more of the average NBA player is, but I really don't expect him to be a good, efficient offensive player for at least his rookie season.
Yeah, I would. I don't think he's going to be hyper efficient either, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's more efficient than he was at Baylor, just because it's not an incredibly high bar to set for him. And I just think at Baylor, he was playing basically the three a lot and being guarded by threes. And for some guards, that's really exciting because you're getting guarded by like slower players that may be taller than you, but you can just blow by them. And Keyonte's just not that kind of player. So I felt like forcing to play a lot of three at Baylor actually hurt his efficiency quite a lot because he's a guy who I feel like is at his best being guarded by guards because he can create space more on the perimeter than he can really trying to blow by guys and get inside to the rim. That's not really his game. And so I think combination of role and the fact that he's going to actually be guarded by guys more his size this year, more likely they'll be high quality defenders for sure. But and just the NBA game is just more efficient than college just in general. And so I think I wouldn't be surprised for like hovering around 40%, which would be more efficient than it was at Baylor last year.
I would certainly hope that he continues to accept what role he currently has with the Jazz, knowing that he's not going to have the same type of usage that he had at Baylor. I certainly hope that when he gets the ball, if it's a high efficient look, great. I'd love to see him try to score. But I also hope that he continues to look more for the pass and just really makes the smart read, the smart decision as much as possible, because he may not get a ton of shots in his rookie year, but I would love to see if he's able to be active off ball, look for the pass, try to be just a super efficient player, and as much as possible, try to take shots that are higher percentage look. So I don't think he's going to be uber efficient his first year, but I think with the Jazz's system and playing alongside people like Jordan Clarkson, Lauri Markkanen, Walker Kessler in the dunker position, I think it's certainly possible that as his usage stays fairly low, that his efficiency might increase because of that, just because he is getting those higher percentage looks. But it'll certainly be interesting to see what it looks like as an inefficient college player to see how that'll translate to the NBA. If you were Will Hardy and you could say, Keyonte, this is the one skill I want you to focus on right now, or here's the one thing I want you to make your absolute life or death you're going to get better at this year, what would that be for you?
I mean, he's got a few things to work on. I would say it's tough for me not to just say on ball defense and fighting through screens in particular. But just because that's kind of the answer for pretty much every rookie ever, I'm going to say instead, just I want him to work on finishing packages that are going to help him finish at a better rate, just because I don't think he's athletic enough to be a guy that's just always going in and trying to finish over people. It's going to get him to the foul line, which is good, and he should definitely pick his spots there, but I think he needs a little bit more in the way of counters than what he showed at the Summer League. Once he gets inside and, floaters and different layup packages to get more around players than trying to get over them.
Yeah. I would probably say continued playmaking, work on his passing, work on his good decision making. Because I think to your point, Kyler, he's never going to be a good above the rim player. I don't think he's ever going to be a fantastic player in the paint. But I think what he can do is get by his man with his craftiness, force rotations. He might not be able to finish over those rotations, but I think that should at least create some opportunities for other players, whether it be to recognize a mismatch or to maybe find the open man off of some sort of, help scheme. So I think that's where he's going to be most impactful, is if he can create that space, recognize what the defense is doing, and then, make the necessary play out of that. I think that's what's going to give him minutes more than his ability to shoot. Because if he's just trying to, make these tough shots or finishes after, some great move to get open, then he's probably going to end up just being a high volume, low efficiency scorer. And I don't think that's how he's going to stay in the league.
Yeah, I completely agree with both of you. I think if I were to just add one thing on top of that, Obviously, he's playing a guard position. I'd love to see him continue to develop as a shooter. I think that because he has good size, he has decent size if he's a point guard, but he doesn't have elite size. So that combined with the fact that he's not an elite athlete at the NBA level and it might be more difficult for him to score closer to the basket, I just think it would open up the rest of his game if he could become, like a high 30s shooter from three, or maybe even get closer to that 40 range later in his career. If he can become a knockdown shooter from the perimeter, I think the way that that opens up how he can pass, how he can potentially drive off of that, how he can just impact the game in so many more ways when you have a very like legitimate threat from the 3-point line. I think that would just help develop some of these other areas of his game if teams constantly have to worry about his ability to knock down a 3-pointer. So I will say I still don't know how I feel about the Jazz taking Keyonte George over Jalen Hood-Schifino, but I have been pleasantly surprised in how well he has played so far in Summer League. It'll be great to see how he continues to develop throughout the season, and certainly happy to have Keyonte George on the Utah Jazz. Now, while it's certainly fun to talk about rookies and seeing them for the first time in their new threads, there was another player for the Jazz that stood out throughout all of the Salt Lake Summer League who was a rookie last year and really amongst the games this week kind of looked like a man amongst boys. The way that Ochai Agbaji played this last week, he just looked so much more developed, so much more fluid, and so much more comfortable than almost anybody else on the court. I remember at one point, I think I turned to you, Landon, during the game against OKC, and it was like, it's Ochai Agbaji and it's Jalen Williams, and everyone else just looks a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit frazzled. But just the fluidness that Ochai played, at least to me, was really impressive. Just to give some stats real quick, in the game against OKC on the third, he had 17 and 9. On the Grizzlies, granted, he was playing against a very bottom of the barrel Grizzlies team, even for Summer League. He scored 22 with 13 rebounds and 4 assists. And my question for both of you is, after seeing just how impressive he looked overall during Summer League, do you think he's locked down that starting position next to Jordan Clarkson in our backcourt?
I think so. Go ahead.
Okay. I don't know necessarily that. I think he ended up putting up good total numbers, but if you look at his efficiency, it wasn't incredible. And really, it's just because the Jazz asked him to do stuff that he's probably not going to be asked to do at the NBA level coming the regular season. That's what Summer League is for. For a guy who's already kind of proven that he can hang with the guys at the NBA level, what's the Summer League for? Well, can your game expand farther than what you showed last year? And he definitely showed flashes of that, but I still feel like he's at his most comfortable when he's in more catch and shoot situations and he's in more transition situations. I still think I don't know if I can say right now, like, yeah, he's going to be the starter over a guy like Colin Sexton. I think it would be the wise move, but I just can't say, yeah, I feel super confident the Jazz are going to do that.
Yeah, those are some good points. I think, obviously if Clarkson's there, then playmaking will be an issue if Abaji's out there with him. But I think his defensive upside and his floor spacing ability is what I think would make him make the most sense as a starter alongside Clarkson. I think he's kind of a guy you can put on their best guard and kind of hopefully help him defend it. And then I think it helps Clarkson to have another guard who's a floor spacer out there, right? It gives Clarkson more opportunities to play make for himself and for others. I mean, Clarkson's ability to pass has improved dramatically since he came to the Jazz. I think last year he showed his ability to pass, and it wasn't bad. And I don't think the Jazz really care about traditional point guard roles. So I think that's something that could help. And again, I think he's the only option that makes sense for spacing reasons, because Sexton, as good as he is, he can't really shoot. Chris Dunn's not a great 3-point shooter. Agbaji is, so you could kind of pull him out there and then run your sets and hopefully have someone, pass to him when he gets open. So I just think the opportunities are better for Agbaji if he's starting and getting the majority of those minutes. Could be wrong. I wouldn't be upset if they went another direction, but that's just what makes the most sense to me.
I think something that you touched on briefly there was he's somebody that you can throw against the other team's best guard. Um, this was the first time I'd seen him play any meaningful minutes in person. And for me, I was impressed with just how almost physically imposing he looked. Like he's not like incredibly tall like some of the other players out there, but there was one point where he was standing next to Chet and Chet, being tall and skinny and lanky, and then seeing Agbaji where his arms are just huge and he just seems long and he just seems athletic and he just seems like somebody who has a little bit more of that athleticism, that quickness to be able to guard a little bit more efficiently, despite the fact that he may not be a perfect, complete player. What do you think his defensive upside actually is going into next season? Like, is he somebody that you feel comfortable could slow down a little bit somebody like a Steph Curry or a Luka or a Kyrie? I mean, I don't know if I believe in him that much that he can play super meaningful, impactful defense on a person of that caliber. But do you think he's going to be branded next year somebody who can be a bit of a guard stopper? Because he certainly has the size and the athleticism to do it.
It's certainly possible. I mean, he's like you said, he's really well built. I think his body fat cannot be higher than like percent. The dude is shredded, but and he's certainly going to get the opportunities to prove it. He is the best perimeter defender we have on the team. Though that's not necessarily the most impressive feat on this Jazz team. We're not chock full of perimeter defenders here. And I agree with what you guys said, even though I said I'm not ready to hand him the keys to be our starter. That's just because I don't know what the Jazz are going to do. I think he's the best fit, even though that would be the worst passing lineup in the league for sure. Even with Sexton, might still be the worst passing lineup in the league, if we're being honest, though. So he's certainly going to get his opportunities. Do I think he can be a guard stopper? I don't know if he's that good defensively. I think he's good, but I don't know if he's going to have this reputation as one of the better defenders in the league. I think he's just a good one.
Yeah, I think it depends on the matchup at the end of the day. I think he's probably our best option against any guard in the sense that like Royce O'Neal was our best option against the other team's best perimeter defender. Right. Royce O'Neal, I think we all can realize wasn't like an elite defender. He was just the best defender that we had, which is why he kind of got all the tough matchups. As far as Ochai, I think he could stop bigger guards, like think like a Luka or something. Someone's that are, kind of a little bit on their craftiness and their strength. I think he could, match up with them pretty well. In terms of like the smaller, quicker, shiftier guards, like your Stephs and your Kyries, I don't think he did. I don't have a lot of confidence in him being able to stop them. That's not a knock on him. I don't think anyone can really stop those guys, but yeah, and I think he has the size and the strength to match up with guards. I don't know if he necessarily has, the lateral quickness to keep up with like a Kyrie or a Steph.
Which Ochai is not a perfect player. Neither is Keyonte. Neither is Colin Sexton. But when you think about what our guard rotation can look like potentially next year, I don't know about you guys, but it gets me kind of excited. We have Clarkson locked down, who can be the adult in the room, who can be, who can just go on a heater and just go off for 30 really at any given moment. He's that skilled as a scorer. You have Young Bull, who's, despite the fact that he's been in the league for a while now, he's still pretty young and he can be pretty fun as you watch him driving in the paint. You have Keyonte George, a rookie who seems to have a lot of potential and seems completely bought in, at least at this point, to developing into a well-rounded player. And then you have Agbaji, who was a rookie last year, who seems like he's really coming into his own as a very competent, if not impressive, 3-and-D archetype at the guard position. So it's certainly going to be fun. We have a lot of young talent on this roster. None of this talent is necessarily perfect, but it will certainly be interesting to see how they develop and what the Jazz will have to work with going forward as we start to chase the postseason here over the next few years. To finish up this segment, there were a lot of other players playing for the Jazz this weekend, some of which I was not familiar with at all. But were there any flashes you saw from any other player besides Keyonte George or Ochai Agbaji that you thought, I could actually see this guy maybe cracking the Jazz's rotation at some point.
No.
Nothing too crazy, but I think one of the players that stood out to me a little bit was Michael Potter. He's never going to be a star, but I think in every game he was fairly consistent, played within himself, played efficiently. Other than the play where he turned the ball over to Trey Mann and then got dunked on like I've never seen any human being ever get dunked on in my life. If you haven't seen that, go look it up. Just look up like Jazz Summer League dunk. Seeing
It
that
was
live
filthy.
was crazy.
Absolutely filthy.
Other than that, like I think he could be a fine piece at the end of your rotation. I think he's a guy who's not going to, cause any issues, and he's going to, make the necessary play when it's opportunity to make that play. But other than that, I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, Micah Potter was probably our third best player, and I think he is who he has been since he's been on the Jets. So,
Yeah. I was hoping to see more out of Smanic. Didn't really see anything there that overly impressed me, thinking that he's an NBA ready player right now. But at least with Potter, he did show that he can be a good shooter, which that's kind of been his calling card. It seemed like he was at least fluid on the offensive end of the court. But I don't think any of these guys, other than Ochai and Keyonte, are going to see any type of minutes unless there's a lot of injury on the Jazz this season. But
I mean,
it was
Potter also, like, the first 3 minutes of the game looked like he was going to be a Chet stopper, and then Chet woke up.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, for the first year, we were like, wow, Potter's actually taking Holmgren to town. But then Holmgren decided that he wasn't going to get owned by Micah Potter and started returning the favor a little bit.
Right.
Which for me, who absolutely loved Chet in the draft last year, it was fun for me to see him play against the Jazz. I still don't think he's a perfect, well-developed player at this point, but it was certainly fun to see flashes of a guy that I had number one on my big board last year. I thought he was better than Paolo. I was probably wrong about that, but it'll certainly be fun to see how he plays this year.
No, so this will be the first year that we can kind of, because you guys had Chet, I had Paolo. This is the first year they're all playing together. Start to see who they've been right.
But it was certainly fun going and cheering for a Jazz Summer League team. I believe the last time we went and saw Summer League together, the highlight of the Jazz's Summer League roster was Jarrell Brantley. So it was certainly fun to see somebody who wasn't a 50-something pick playing for the Jazz. If you have any questions about Summer League or about any of the guys who are playing, feel free to drop it in the comments. We'll be happy to chat about it with you. But overall, I think the Summer League so far has been an overwhelming success. Just getting Keyonte minutes, seeing Ochai thrive. It's been great to see what the Jazz have done so far, and it'll be even more fun to see what they continue to do and how their players continue to develop throughout the rest of this offseason. We're going to take a quick break, and then we will be back with a couple more fun things to discuss. Welcome back for segment 2, where we are going to be talking about 2 more deals, one of which is a potential and one of which we just think is not going to happen at all. We're recording this on Saturday morning, and it was just reported about an hour ago that restricted free agent Paul Reed, center from the 76ers, has agreed to sign a 3-year, $23 million deal with the Jazz. The 76ers have until Sunday to match the agreement. However, given the fact that it would be a $14 million luxury tax hit if they decide to match that offer, and the fact that they just signed Mo Bamba, it's seeming increasingly unlikely that they're going to match the offer, and Paul Reed is likely going to be on the Jazz in that backup center role starting for next season. He's a guy who, unless you're a diehard NBA fan, you probably wouldn't know a lot about him. Last year, he played backup to Joel Embiid, where they basically just split minutes. He just played the backup role. In that role, he averaged 4 points and 4 rebounds. And even though the stat line isn't overly impressive, his per minute averages on the rebounding numbers and points were actually pretty good for a backup center. He is a little bit undersized. He's only 6'9", but as far as backup centers go, I know that we had talked about it in our episode last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago when we were talking about free agency. Who's the backup center behind Walker Kessler? Is it going to be Kelly Olynyk, is he just going to move into that role full time? Is it going to be Vernon Carey? Like, who is it going to be after the Damian Jones trade? And Paul Reed, I think, is definitely an intriguing option for those minutes where we don't have Walker Kessler. Landon, when you heard about the Jazz signing Paul Reed, how did you feel about the idea of him coming to the Jazz, and how did you feel about his fit with our current roster construction?
My initial reaction, my gut reaction was another front court player. What? We've got so much depth now. We've got so much size, which could hopefully be a good thing. I think he's a fine backup center, I think, especially for what we're doing. I know you talked about size being undersized. I actually see that strength because I think that a compliment to the other players that we're going to have to play that spot, whether it be, Kessler or Olynyk or whoever. I think we have someone now who I think, again, is a little more nimble, maybe, a little more switchable than those guys could be. So I think having a piece like that adds a little bit of diversity is good. It's crazy going to see how these minutes are going to end up being sorted out between all these players that we have now, especially Olynyk. It makes me wonder what Olynyk's rolls forward is going to be, because we have John Collins, who's probably going to be our starter. I guess Olynyk could back him, but we'll see. I don't hate it. I think, discount money for backup centers is never a bad thing. So I think it should be fine. I'm just interested to see how the minutes play out between all of our players.
Yeah, I mean, with Paul Reed, 3 for 23 is not a huge commitment, and which is what I prefer. And he's a fine backup center. I don't think he's somebody that requires a particular level of excitement to acquire, but we definitely needed another center. Even though, to Landon's point, we have a lot of front court players. I feel like we have so many power forwards, way too many, or at least guys that best position is power forward, in my mind. But we needed another center. It kind of feels like, Landon's point, maybe the old Jazz system of wanting that true center for all 48 minutes isn't going to be what Will Hardy prefers, which I certainly don't mind myself. And so, yeah, it's a backup center. We needed it after we cut Vernon Carey, who we didn't even talk about from Summer League because he did look like an NBA player. And so we needed another actual NBA player to play center for us. And that's what Paul Reed will be, should the Sixers not match.
I think the Jazz, just in terms of where they're at in their rebuild, anytime you can get a solid contract that can either play for you or can later be packaged in trades, then that's something that you do 10 times out of 10. I think Paul Reed, I think we got decent value on him. I mean, the 3 years for $23 million. It's certainly not a very expensive contract, and he's still quite young. I mean, he was a second-round pick in the 2020 draft class, so he's only been in the league for a couple of years, and he was certainly a serviceable big man behind Joel Embiid last year and was one of the best regular season teams. And I think it just gives us another option, a little bit more flexibility. We've talked about it before, both in previous episodes of the pod and then just when we talk about the Jazz when we're hanging out together, about how we want to see the Jazz have lineups that can be a little bit more versatile and somebody who can maybe play a little bit of a different role depending on the matchup. And I think Paul Reed, given the fact that he's not your traditional lumbering big man that you might be used to, I think it just gives us another option. And if we're ever in a position where we need to throw in salary filler or anything else, then he's a very easy contract to kind of fit that in. And everyone can always use a guy who can rebound at the backup center position. So while it's certainly not going to blow up every single headline, it's great to see that the Jazz are not just content to sit back and just roll out what we have, but even in the backup center position, they're actively looking for ways that we can get good contracts, competent individuals, and continue to build a stronger team around our core of Markkanen, Kessler, and our slew of first-round picks from this year. Now let's transition to a topic that has been crazy the last few weeks on Jazz Twitter. Damian Lillard, who at least I thought as of even a couple weeks ago was going to stay his entire career in Portland, has officially requested a trade he has made it very clear that the only place he wants to be traded to is the Miami Heat. But throws a little bit of wrench in those plans when you realize, one, Dame doesn't have a no trade clause, and B, unless Miami can get a third team involved in a significant way, Miami's not going to have the best offer for Damian Lillard if a team that is laden with a bunch of different assets, one of the foremost of those being the Utah Jazz, then it just seems unlikely, unless some sort of magic can happen, that Miami's going to be able to put up the best offer for Dame. And then Portland will have to decide if they want to be loyal to a player who's been loyal to them for 10 plus years, or if they make the business decision and just take whatever the best offer is out there. So there hasn't been any official offer that's been reported by the Jazz to Dame, but given the fact that he played his college ball at Weber State and the fact that the Jazz are one of the few teams with the assets that they could just bring him to Utah, it seems like, even though it's not likely, it's at least somewhat of a possibility. Kyler, how likely do you think it is that Dame actually comes to the Jazz?
Not likely. This whole situation, there's been so much debate about it on all social media platforms among Jazz fans, and I think in a vacuum, you obviously would want Dame. You just wonder about what you'd have to give up. But at the end of the day, this whole agent calling teams and telling them not to trade for Damian Lillard if you're not the Miami Heat is just really annoying to me. And so I honestly hope someone out there, other than the Heat, trades for Dame, just because I don't want, this kind of behavior to really be rewarded. You could debate about whether Portland owes Dame or not, but I just think I would let somebody else do that. Because honestly, I think if we trade for Dame, we probably need to make another trade. So you're talking about giving up even more assets, because I don't think the current Jazz 4+ Dame is enough to be the level of contender that Dame probably wants to be should he come here. So I think the fact that it would kind of need to be like a Kawhi and PG situation, except trading for both instead of trading for one and signing the other. That's just like going to be a lot of assets to give up for a team that has a lot of unknowns right now.
Yeah. I think the chance of him ending up in Utah is slim and not very likely, but is in the realm of possibility by virtue of the fact that the Jazz have the best assets to play for him. I think the question you need to ask, well, first of all, Dame doesn't want to play here. He wants to play in Miami. He's made that abundantly clear through several media outlets. So I don't think, there's a lot of, it doesn't seem like a good idea to go for a player who doesn't want to be with your team long term. Secondly, I think we should question whether we even want him here. Obviously, he's a great talent, but he is getting older. He's on a crazy contract that's still several years out. If we do get for him, he's going to become maybe the most untradeable contract in the league just by virtue of his age and how much he's going to be getting paid. So we're going to be stuck with him if we don't end up being able to put together a championship team around him. And secondly, and to Kyler's point, what it would take to get him would probably cost the type of assets that would allow us to be a championship team around him. We'd probably have to give up, Kessler, maybe even Alari, or, a few of our good prospects and a lot of draft picks. And so we're stuck with this massive contract and not a lot of flexibility to really build around it. So then Damian Lillard is in a situation again where he's kind of the best player on a mediocre team. It's not good for him. It's not good for us. I think it makes a lot more sense to play a role of someone who can kind of facilitate Damian Lillard to Miami and hopefully get something out of that whole transaction. But yeah, him coming here, I don't think is likely. And I think we should really consider whether that's something that would be good for us in general.
We've talked about before about win now moves, and we had a lot of Jazz players saying that acquiring John Collins was a win now move, and Short's a win now move in the sense of, yes, you will win more games next season, but it doesn't mean you are putting yourself in like championship contention. And if you're a team that's going to take on Damian Lillard, who in like I believe his age 36 season is going to be making $60 million as a small point guard, the only reason you make that trade is because if you think that he squarely puts you as one of the top 4 teams in the league with the best chances at winning a title. One thing that is good is that Dame wants to go to Miami, and Miami was able to make it to the finals last year off of role players, Bam Adebayo, and Jimmy Butler. And you can actually see the path or make the argument that if Dame Lillard joins those two and they form a big three in Miami, that they could be super, super competitive and could be one of the finals favorites for next year. I don't see that future with the Jazz if they give up all of their depth and all of their picks for somebody like a Damian Lillard. I just don't think that Kessler's at the position where he can be that guy. Markkanen might be able to be a number 2 or number 3 on a title team, but it's really, do you have the depth and do you have enough faith in both sides of the ball, your offensive and your defensive side of the ball? Do you have players who've played in big games who can deliver in the playoffs? The Jazz have a young team with not a lot of playoff experience, and getting a Damian Lillard, I think, is giving up our flexibility for the future. It's giving up all of our assets that we have so that we can try to win now, where I don't think we have a strong enough foundation to win right now. If it was 2 years down the road and we had an Agbaji who is better, a Kessler who had really come into his own, and maybe 1 or 2 of our first round picks can be like legitimate guys on a playoff team, then it would be a little bit different. But I think trading for Dame right now would just be giving up way too many assets for a team that isn't ready to compete for a title right now. So for all of those who want to see Dame come back to Utah, in my heart of hearts, I'd love to see him come back to Utah. I remember watching him play at Weber State, but I don't think it makes sense for Dame, who's trying to win a championship before he retires, to come here. And I don't think it makes sense for the Jazz, who are not ready to give him an excellent title shot right now.
Yeah, like to your point, there's just so much unknown with this current stick of the Jazz. We talked about the reality of that this type of trade is probably in the Jazz's future down the line. Just probably too early. I don't think it would take Lowry or Kessler, like Landon was saying. I think the most likely player to kind of headline the package would be Taylor Hendricks, just because I don't think Portland would want Kessler for sure. I just think you get Dame to play next to Lowry and Kessler, so the Jazz would never offer either of those players. I think we wouldn't have to have the best package for him either. But something that Kevin O'Connor, who I know G Bobby listens to a lot and follows a lot, he's identified the Jazz as the most likely non-Miami Heat destination, but he thinks that they would have to trade for 2 players. They'd also have to trade for like a Paul George or a Pascal Siakam or some of these other guys that are rumored to be available. And that's just 2 trades worth of assets is really, to Landon's point, hindering your asset pool. And my number one complaint about last year's iteration, or the last iteration of the Jazz, the Rudy Donovan, is that there just weren't a lot of assets to go around. There weren't a lot of avenues to improve. And so even if we were to trade for Dame and even Paul George, let's say, and it used pretty much all of our future assets, if that team's not a title contender year one, you are who you are at that point. And I think that's just a spot we were in not too long ago, when I don't fancy getting back there so soon.
Yeah, and I think the Clippers are a great example of this that you just brought up, right? Like they kind of cashed in everything to get this big 3, right? This championship contending super team on paper. Injuries played a role in that, but again, that didn't quite work. And now they're kind of stuck with very limited flexibility. I mean, last season, right, they had to kind of cash in on Russell Westbrook and hope he would be their saving grace at point guard. Just didn't turn out. So I just don't want to be in that situation again, where we're like a perennial 1st or 2nd round playoff exit with no opportunity or no ability to prove or get past that.
No, and like just when it comes to team building, it's always, are you giving yourself the best shot to win a championship? And that doesn't mean are you best shot to win it now. It's look at your roster, look at your construction. Because for a lot of teams, it makes sense that you have enough pieces around you that you should try to win right now. Miami being a perfect example of that. There are other teams like the Jazz who we don't exactly know what we got. Could Taylor Hendricks be amazing? Sure. There's also a possibility he'll bust. Same with Keyonte George, same with Bryce Sensabaugh, same with Ochai. Like, does he ever like fully develop? I mean, like, there are just so many unknowns with what we have right here. And I always get worried where you are trying to give up a bunch that you don't know if it's good or not in exchange for a known commodity, especially when that commodity is aging. Some people get rich doing those like get quick rich kind of things, flipping houses or, other type of schemes, and they can make that work. And that does work occasionally. But the most likely way that you're going to build wealth is through like that constant investing, right? And I feel like the Jazz need to constantly invest in this team, constantly get better, improve around the edges. And then when the time is right, where we have enough and we feel confident in our core, that's where we can make that big move. But making that big move right now, I just don't think it makes sense for any side in this situation. And I want to see the Jazz be a championship contender. I want to see them host the Larry O'Brien Trophy. And I think trading for Dame right now does not put us on the path where that is most likely. And I love Dame.
Would be fun to have him in Utah for sure.
Oh, I would 100% get a jersey if he came to Utah, but I'd also be just a little bit sad on what that meant for our future. But this has been another edition of the Upper Bowl Perspective. It's great to see the Jazz playing back in the Delta Center, even though it's Summer League. It's great to feel like Jazz basketball is now back in full swing. We will be back next week with an all-new episode. If there's anything you want us to chat about, feel free to leave a comment. And as always, please like and subscribe. It helps us out a bunch. Thanks for listening in, and we will see you next week.
Yep.
Bye.